10, 9, ignition sequence start, 6.
Hi, welcome to Launchpad, Rocket Fuel's special interview series where I talk to people involved in, well, normally the Rocket Pool ecosystem, but today we're making an exception for that, and we actually have Dmitriy Gusakov on the episode. Dima, you might know him from his blue hair on Twitter and on his Discord profile pic. I'm kind of disappointed that there's no blue hair here, but Dima is the lead tech lead on Lido's CSM module, which we've all been talking about for over, well, nearly a year now. And I thought it might be a good idea to get Dima on the show and ask him some questions about Lido and the CSM module and all the different things that are happening over at Lido. So welcome, Dima, to Launchpad. It's nice to have you. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Like, who are you? What do you do?
Hello. Yeah. So the short version of my name is indeed Dima, so you can call me this way. First of all, great pleasure to be here. And it's not a typical thing for a person like me to be here, but I'm really happy to be here. So speaking of, like, what do you want me to tell first? Do we want to start with...
No, we can just tell us a little bit about what your job is, just really briefly, and then we'll come and talk about that in more detail later.
Oh, okay.
So,
okay.
Yeah.
So my role, even though I wouldn't say it's a job title, it's a contributor title. And it was actually myself to give this title to me, because there's no such a thing as job titles in Lido and jobs, because we're all contributors. So even though it is technical leader, but I'm doing a bit of everything, since we have a relatively small team. There's 5 of us. Permanent, and we are getting help out of other contributors from time to time. So my focus is to make sure that the product part of CSM, like the thing facing the market, facing the users, actually match with the tech stuff, and at the same time maintain a quality and the delivery time of the technical stuff. But most of the technical stuff, like most of the code and the other stuff, is actually done by my teammates who actually became Lido contributors together with myself about 2.5 years ago.
Oh, wow. Cool. So you've been with Lido for 2.5 years. That's really cool. So we'll actually come back and talk about all of that CSM stuff later in the episode. But let's start with a little bit of about who you are. So where did your journey in life start, bringing you to where you are now, like being a blockchain developer? Like, I'm sure you had an interest in computers early on. How was that for you?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, before Lido, before joining crypto, 3 years ago, maybe 3.5 years ago, I wasn't even thinking about becoming a blockchain developer and about getting involved into blockchain. For me, crypto was a thing that exists, but it exists over here. I exist in the other place, and there were no connections between us. But the math and the programming itself, they were always of my interest.
Oh, nice.
But at the same time, I never got a degree or education in programming, because all of my education is actually math, including my PhD. But it turned out that I can do something in terms of programming, and that's why I ended up becoming a blockchain developer, because in crypto, that's probably the best application for me and my skills.
That's amazing.
But the actual journey, it started when I was born, because I was born in a family of mathematicians, both my mother and father. They are both mathematicians. And starting from a very childhood, some say that they were interested in computers in 80s. I wasn't even born in 80s. I'm actually not that old. But from the very early days, I've been interested in computers, not specifically in programming, for a relatively long time. So before my high school, I wasn't interested in programming, but I was the guy who can reinstall Windows on your computer if something goes wrong, or get yourself a brand new, almost licensed version of a game. Because, I'm Russian and I'm born in Russia, and for a while, there was literally a way to buy a licensed software, especially when I was a child. So you have to find a way to get it for yourself. And I was the one to help people get stuff like that. And when I was very, very young, something like maybe 7 or 8 years old, by that time, computers were still something incredibly expensive that neither me nor my family can afford. But my father, he worked in a computer distribution firm, And by that time, like an average laptop cost you more than an average SUV nowadays. I mean, in comparison.
Yeah.
So the only way to get in touch with this stuff, to give it a try, was to somehow get access to the computer that was not yours, but was of someone. And the best opportunity here was that service time for any warranty repairs back in the day was not a week or 2 weeks like it is now, but it was up to half a year. And from time to time, we were lucky enough, I mean, not we, but my father and his colleagues, they were lucky enough to get a request for repair, which can be fulfilled like within a week. But given that the actual computer arrived from another city, for example, and the scheduled appointment to pick it up was like 3 months later or 4 months later, there was a chance to, I mean, just to use it, just to get a hands-on experience on this stuff, technically in terms of testing. But I mean, if something is repaired, why not to give it a try? So it has nothing to do with the private data and stuff like that. Yeah. But that was the unique opportunity, because all of my other friends, they've been just playing this video games, like very, very simple and basic. I was not able to play something because, I mean, if you have a clear laptop, you cannot do much on it in terms of games. But what you can do is you can get experience with this basic software, like the early versions of Microsoft Office and stuff like that. And by that time, I learned how to like reinstall operating system. And that's where my journey with computers started.
That's so cool.
Move back a bit further, I entered my university courses. And during my university courses, we became friends with Sam, one of the Lido OGs. And we became friends like way before Sam even joined Lido. I mean, I think by that time he was already well involved in programming, but has nothing to do with crypto. And then one day we've been traveling together back from the seaside. It was a 4.5-hour journey. And during that journey, like Sam spent all this journey answering my questions about the project that he recently got involved in, which was Lido. And I was really impressed by first of all, the complexity of crypto in general. Like the first heard of the concept of smart contracts, I was asking a lot of like tricky questions, like how this works, how that works. And by the end of the travel, I was super impressed. I was like, wow, Sam is now doing such a great thing, such a cool thing. And then for the next year, we haven't been talking much because by that time, I mean, he was doing his job, I was doing my job. And later on, when me and my current team, we realized that, okay, we got enough out of classical IT business. We are looking for something new. Where, like, what's the best place where we can apply our already existing skills? I mean, we got bored because moving from one company to another, all of us individually before and on the last workplace all together, we understood that we are familiar with the common stuff, with the regular stuff that is used by corporations, but we want to learn something new. Is there a way to learn something new? And it turned out that crypto was a way. And we had a lot of conversations with other Lido contributors. So first of all, I reached out to Sam and say, hey, man, there's a team of 4. We can do this, this, and that. Are there any demand? She said, oh, yeah, there might be. So let's have a conversation. And we've been in touch for a pretty while, like I guess 3 to 4 months. We had like different conversations, formal, informal. And after that, we decided that, first of all, it works for us because it was something pretty unusual it's like exiting your job in the American bank, like top rated American bank, for some barely known crypto thing. I mean, outside crypto world for sure. It was a challenge, and it was a thing that we need to agree on our side that we are okay with jumping in, and for sure for the other Lido contributors to propose us to the DAO, saying that, okay, we want to see that. And that's what it is.
Yeah. Let's take a step back a little bit. So you finished, like, you did a math degree at college and then you did a PhD in math. What was your area of research in your PhD?
It actually, even though it is called mathematics, I usually say it is mathematics because it is, but there's a special field within mathematics called mechanics. Because if you tell someone that I have a PhD in mechanics, they are asking, can you
it's
fix
engineering
my car?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. But
yeah.
My thing was not engineering. It was like theoretical research, and it was focused on, like, let me explain it in a simple terms. So imagine you have a layer of, it might be like a surface of a road, which is multi-layered, or you have a surface of something more complex, or, for example, a human bone, which is also layered, as it turned out. And then you need a way to figure out the properties of these layers, taking into account the fact that, first of all, these layers are not like strictly separated, but they are mixed in on the connection. And the second thing, that you cannot destroy this thing. So you need a way to somehow apply a force or oscillations, measure the outcome in the other parts. So for example, you apply oscillations here, you measure the outcome here, and then based on this data, you need to determine as thoroughly as possible the actual properties of the material. So for medical engineering, it is really important to figure out like the state of the bone, like has it been affected by this or that disease or not. For the road surface or for the oceans shore, it is very important, again, not to dig a super deep hole, but just applying oscillations and measuring signal to figure out. So that's the topic. And the uniqueness of this thing, even though there are a lot of studies like that, was that we were taking into account the fact that layers are actually intermixed on the, like when they touch each other. And that allows us to get a more realistic picture, because in the existing researches, what you get as the result is a bunch of distinct values. However, when you actually compare it to the real case, you see that even though, like in the middle of the layer, your data might be accurate, but at the point where two layers touch, on the boundary, the data might be not that realistic, and it might cause some problems, especially for medicine, because for medicine, the main issues in terms of bones, they mostly occur on the boundaries between layers and not in the middle of the layer.
That's interesting. That's so cool. So then you said that you finished your PhD and then you went into like a tech job. Like, how did that transition happen?
Yeah. So first of all, again, as I mentioned, I was born and raised in Russia. And during my university courses and later on during my PhD, I was a private teacher, part-time private teacher. And it was probably the best option in terms of, ratio between efforts spent and returns. The returns were like not great, because basic teachers in Russia, they are very low paid. Private teachers are paid a bit more. So working part-time as a teacher was enough for me to afford like my living, nothing more than that. But I was happy with it because I had enough time to do my research and at the same time pay my bills. And once I was done with the PhD, I figured out that, okay, the next step might be to continue my research career. But the thing is that in Russia, if you continue your research career in university, you are getting paid even worse than a part-time private teacher.
Yeah.
At the same time, continuing as a private teacher was also not an option, because that was I had in mind the ideas that one day it might be transformed into something bigger, like into a private school. But back in the day, such an opportunities in Russia were not that very welcome, just because of the fact that not much of people were able to actually pay for that. And I was not ready to start a business of my own. So I decided, I have mathematical education. What can I do in my home city? Again, remote work was not invented at that time. No, sure, it was invented, but it was not
for you. Yeah.
Not for me.
Yeah.
So I simply looked through the job board and entered as a second line support engineer in a telecom company.
Okay.
Just because of the fact that in terms of payment, it was probably one of the most interesting offers for those who have no previous experience or like a long list of things to show. And after that, I rapidly understood that, hey, I can do this, I can do that. Let's try new. And in 2 years, I was the leading expert in the field of technical support and was doing some random research and development stuff. And after that, I switched my job multiple times and again ended up in Lido. And before that, yeah, I've been working in multiple Russian companies as a different types of either software engineer or engineer in automated testing and stuff like that.
Are you in Russia now?
No, I live in Spain currently, in Barcelona.
Oh, okay. That's cool. I love Barcelona. It's such a great city. Let's talk a little bit about like what you had heard about crypto in like, those early, while you were still, before you started working in crypto, like what did you know about crypto? Did you know anything about it?
Not that much, actually. I was a pretty, I would say, average person. So I've heard that, oh, there's such a thing as crypto. Okay. And there's such a thing as Bitcoin and Ethereum. And I even heard that you can mine Bitcoin on a special machine and Ethereum on your GPU. And yeah, that was more or less it. For sure, I learned something about like how the blockchain is built, what's the mathematical concept behind it. But I've never heard of smart contracts on Ethereum. That was the main discovery again during my travel journey with Sam.
Yeah.
And this discovery actually impressed me because I was always thinking that for me, crypto was mostly Bitcoin and mostly just distributed ledger that, okay, is secure and decentralized, but with like zero utility except for value storage. But when I realized and when I learned that there's such a thing as decentralized finance applications and smart contracts, I was really impressed by that fact. And yeah, I was willing to do something.
So when did this train journey happen? Was it like in 2020, 2021, somewhere around then?
It was 2021.
Yeah.
It was the like spring 2021.
Oh, so that was bull market mania phase where the prices were really good for everything. I guess it makes sense that you heard about it then. So let's talk a little bit more about that train journey and about Sam. So you knew Sam from university, is that right?
Yeah. He studied like at the same faculty, but not. I mean, we've been somewhere nearby at the same building. He's a bit older than me, so for me, he was always like an elder brother, man to whom I reach out with the most complicated and sophisticated questions.
Nice. So let's actually just take a step back for the listeners for a minute. Like, who is Sam? Like, what's his full name? Like, what does he do with Lido? How is he involved with Lido?
So Sam, you've probably seen him. I mean, you've probably not seen him much. He is one of the core of a group of core developers. So I'm not quite sure about the very, very inception of Lido, to be honest. That's a bit of a dark forest for me. But I know that he was one of a few people, maybe not to actually create the initial code, but the updated version. So I'm not quite sure if I can like fully disclose his name or so, but
that's fine.
Sam from Lido. He from time to he has been active in Twitter for a while.
Okay.
He's actually the main author of the dual governance concept and the technical leader of all this direction. So you've probably heard from him with some updates about dual governance and stuff like that. That's the most recent.
That's cool. Okay. And then after that train journey, like what changed in your mind about crypto? Like what were you thinking about? How did that happen?
So again, I was really impressed by the existence of an ecosystem and of the ability to code that would be securely stored on blockchain, that would execute in a decentralized manner. And at the same time, I was, as a computer enthusiast, I was impressed by the fact that for me, the times when you need to think about, do you have enough memory? Like, or should you move this line of code about this line of code, or should you rearrange them in the other way to make them fit? For me, they had been passed. But now I thought, this time is still here. So you still need to think about not only creating code, because in most enterprises, the typical thing is to some maybe Java-based stack, which is, I guess, probably the most important among enterprises, and then just create a bunch of classes, code, tones of code, and stuff like that. And you never care about performance. Actually, why? Because I mean, you can simply spin up more virtual machines, more threads, and oh, cool, and the performance issue is solved. But with the blockchain, with this development, I was first of all impressed by the concept that you can actually do something on a blockchain, and secondly, about the technical aspect of it, so that you have several limitations, and at the same time, you need to implement something extremely robust because you cannot simply redeploy it and you create a software that actually controls assets, like directly, without your control. So once deployed, that's it, that's done. Even I learned about the upgradability concept later. And back in the day, that was the thing for me, that smart contracts are immutable and they do control funds. And I was like,
yeah.
wow. And you should write them optimally.
So one thing that's really interesting is a lot of people that I've spoken to in the past, they learn about crypto, about like, the digital asset side of it, like, like Bitcoin or maybe Ethereum or some other kind of crypto. And then they get involved in the space and then learn the technicals of it after that. I've seen that journey happen quite a few times. For you, it's really interesting that it was the opposite, where you learned about the technical aspects of it first, and then you learned about the digital assets. Did it make you want to go out and buy Bitcoin or Ethereum or whatever you were learning about, or did you not go out and do that? Like, how did that happen?
So before joining Lido, again, I was impressed by the concept, but I was never a person to invest. I never got myself a stock or something like that. Probably because, I've been still working in Russia, and my only investment was to buy a parking lot, 2 parking lots. Okay, I'm really rich. I do have 2 parking lots in Russia, and that's basically it. So I was never a person to deal a lot with money. I was always more about technical aspect, about technology behind it. So that's why I got my first Ethereum from, I guess, the first contributor payment in Lido. And it was, I don't know, 0.3 or something like that, just to pay for the gas. So no, I never invested before. And again, before I learned about this interesting technical concept of smart contracts, I was never interested in buying crypto, because for me, it was something like, okay, that's the thing that you can mine. Cool. I'll stay away from it, because for me, it was not super interesting to get involved. But when I learned about the technical part, I thought, yeah, that's the thing that I want to get into.
Yeah. So would you say that how long was it after you had that conversation that then you realized you wanted to become a blockchain developer? Like, what was that path like?
So the distance between the conversation and the time I texted Sam, hey, do you need this amazing team of 4, was something around 7 to 8 months. Then some conversations. But when we joined Lido, we actually never joined as blockchain developers, because we had no experience with it.
Yeah.
And we joined with the goal to utilize our existing skills. So we've been focusing on security, on monitoring, on off-chain applications and stuff like that. And then gradually, as some things been popping up, like Lido needs this, Lido needs that, or this part of, like, you've probably remember the thing called Lido on X, like Lido on Polygon, Lido on Solana, and many other things. And I guess in 2022, there was a time when a lot of projects were applying to become Lido on yet another chain. And for the EVM compatible chains, the code that they were proposing, it was audited not only externally, but internally by Lido contributors. And we were the volunteers to participate in this thing. So we've been doing a thorough walk through the code, like learning solidity for ourselves, and also trying to pick up some weak spots and stuff like that. And then we've been developing like small projects, small smart contracts. And CSM actually is our first significant project. And I'm very proud that we seem to did a pretty decent job, at least according to the ongoing audits. Nothing super critical has been found yet, and I'm super happy about it.
Okay, we'll come back to that in a few minutes. But one of the things that I want to talk to you about Lido is, Lido is one of the biggest crypto projects in the world, right? I think in terms of TVL, it's either number 1, or I don't know if Eigenlayer has overtaken it. I think it's still number 1 TVL product, but it's very controversial, right? Like, Lido has people who think it's amazing, but also people who think that it's evil and all this kind of stuff. What did you know about Lido and its place in the greater ecosystem before you joined? Did you know any of this stuff, or?
The only thing that I knew, again, it was the thing that Sam told me, that back in 2021, he told me about the US dollar value in, like, total value locked in US dollars, which was $6 billion by that time, I guess, or something like that. I was really impressed by that figure. I've never heard such a figure before.
Yeah.
But I never never investigated the market in general. And I guess the first time I heard of a position of Lido within the overall DeFi market, within the Ethereum ecosystem, was somewhere in 2022 when someone sent a link in the chat on DeFi Llama saying that, hey, Lido is now number 3 or number 2 or something like that. I was like, wow, really? So what I was mostly focused on is, again, as I said, I was never about this money side of things. I was more about the technical side of the things. I would say that when I joined Lido, I had this figure in mind, but for me, it was just an indicator that this is not a shitty startup, but this is something meaningful. And that was one of the arguments why we decided to make this transition from the traditional software development to crypto. Just because of two facts, actually, because first of all, Sam was here, and the matter of trust is very important here. And the second thing, that they do actually have money. I mean, not them, but the people have delegated their money to them, meaning that they are doing something approximately okay. That was my feeling when I was joining. When I joined, I actually realized that, people are delegating money for them for a reason.
Yeah. And when did you learn that, it wasn't all like roses, what people thought about Lido, and that there was people who actually strongly disliked Lido or very critical of Lido?
I guess I learned about it the first time when we had a conversation with Vasily, probably during it. He was very busy. He's always very busy. And our first dedicated conversation happened, maybe 3 to 4 months since we joined. And he told us that, okay, like, you guys did a great job sorting out the shit. Cool. Now let me give you an introduction of what we are in the market. And what he mentioned is that, okay, you've learned that Lido is a decentralized protocol, and there's actually a bunch of centralized protocols, but our main competitor in terms of decentralized protocols is Rocket Pool. And I was like, okay, Rocket Pool. I gotta learn something about it. And when I jumped into Twitter, I said, okay, so these guys, at least some of them, they do hate Lido. So that was the first time I learned that there are people who are against the concept of Lido, or at least against the current position or size of Lido. But for me, it always was, and it would always be that the main, not a competition, but I would say a battle is between centralized and decentralized protocols. So one may argue that there are different flavors of decentralized protocols. Some are better, some are worse. But at the end of the day, what is important for me personally is the ratio between decentralized and centralized protocols. Because even though, if someone would say, okay, now we have only perfect flavors of decentralized protocols that everyone likes, but their total share is 10%, while 90% is centralized protocols, it's great on one hand, and on the other hand, that's awful, and we are probably, it's probably too late to argue about something.
Yeah. So I think, we'll probably come back to this idea a little bit more later, but the decentralization is a spectrum, right? And you have things like Coinbase or Binance on one side of the spectrum, and still, even a couple of years later, like Rocket Pool, I think, is on the other end of the spectrum where there's like max decentralization. And I think Lido, the thing that people might, and we can talk about this later, but the Lido's positioning, I think people worry about, is that it's more on the centralized side rather than on the decentralized side. And I know that we'll talk about this later, as much as you want, but I think that's where some of the issues might come from, and the animosity towards Lido might come from. What did you like? Were you then just learning about crypto through the lens of Lido, or were you actually going out and learning about Ethereum and other cryptocurrencies and other blockchains? How was that for you?
Yeah, sure. Lido was a way for me to, for sure, to learn, to apply my existing skills, but to actually succeed within Lido, to bring some value within Lido. There were no chance to learn only inside Lido or in the context of Lido. That's why we joined at the very beginning of 2022, and by September 2022. You've all seen this book that we created with my sister. So we've, together with the team, we've been learning, we've been digging into Ethereum before we joined. So during this 3-month or 4-month conversations, we set a meeting internally within the team and decided that if we want to join this thing, this is a brand new shit. We know nothing about it, and there's no way we're going to join and start learning from the day one. We need to start learning from the day minus 60. So the day minus 60 is tomorrow. So that's the plan. Let's go learn it. So first of all, we focused on Ethereum for sure. I did a couple attempts on learning, like deeply learning and deeply technically understanding Solana, but it was a pain in the ass. First of all, because it's Rust.
Yeah.
Secondly, because the way the smart contracts work there was hard to digest from the perspective that I've already learned how it works on Ethereum.
Yeah.
And then trying to reconstruct my brain to understand how it works was pretty complicated. And given that there were no direct application for this thing, so Lido on Solana was developed by another team, and the only thing we've been doing as a team for them is the monitoring stack, which did not require significant knowledge of the insights of the smart contracts. We've been focused mostly on Ethereum, but we did a research this side, that side. Polygon turned out to be pretty simple, both in technical terms. It shares the EVM stack in terms of consensus. The consensus mechanism is pretty simple. And then any other Lido on X protocols that appeared, I've been digging a bit into it. So again, Avalanche consensus system is also pretty simple. However, at the end of the day, I realized that even though Ethereum consensus is super complicated compared to the others, it is reasonably complicated because the other consensus mechanisms, at least the most that I learned about, I've never learned about Cosmos consensus mechanism. Again, it's still an unknown area for me. The others that I've learned about, they were built on a very optimistic assumptions. And as we all know, the thing built on optimistic assumptions may end up as a Terra, which was also a big disaster to a Lido dominance and stuff like that, because Terra actually, at one moment in time, in terms of a dollar total locked value, Lido on Terra was even larger than Lido on Ethereum.
Mm-hmm.
And then it blew up.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't know that Lido was involved in Terra like that. Was it a staking?
Yeah.
It was the same thing?
Yeah,
I had no idea about that. Yeah. Interesting.
I mean,
yeah.
That was a very significant part. Again, at one moment in time, somewhere in 2022, Lido on Terra was larger than Lido on Ethereum. That was right before the overall Terra crash.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, I didn't know that. So, yeah, interesting.
That was the most successful Lido on X protocol, which actually created the overall idea of Lido on some other protocol. But at the end of the day, it turned out that the other networks, the other protocols, they were either not, either the market there was already captured, or it was not fully open, and the amount of effort to be put into this or that network was not reasonable enough. And on most of the networks, except for Ethereum, actually liquid staking is not that of a high demand, to be honest. On Solana, the Lido on Solana was a pretty successful project, but it never made it through the bear market.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah. So since you learned so much about Ethereum, did you come across the Ethereum values that people like to say, Ethereum alignment? I'm sure you've come across that discussion a few times where, decentralization, open source, trustlessness, all that kind of stuff. How did you feel about those values? How did they vibe with who you are? Do you agree with those as being good values to seek? Or do you think that they might not be as important as people make out to be?
No, they are definitely important, and I do agree with all of them. Actually, the thing that I want to say here is that you cannot reach all of them at the same time. It's like a traditional blockchain trilemma or any stuff like that. So if we speak about take two values, decentralization and permissionlessness. That's the thing that I have to deal every day with CSM. So on one hand, you want to make something permissionless. On the other hand, you want to make it really decentralized. But when you make it permissionless, you are losing control over decentralization. Because on one hand, the market might decide who would be the participants, but you may end up in any point. You may end up in a very decentralized point, and you may end up in a very centralized point.
Yeah.
And you need a way to navigate through it. On the other hand, again, you can say that, okay, decentralization is indeed important, and let's not make it permissionless. So that's basically the way Lido started, with the emphasis on a decentralization, but without permissionless entry. And I think that that's one of the ways that it might be achieved, because when you have a control over the level of decentralization, you can actually guarantee this decentralization more or less. And again, later on, now we are adding permissionless. So I think that these values, they do make sense. They are really hard to achieve at the same time, and they are more of a like a North Star or a manifest that you should do only good things. But then there's this peculiarities on this or that stuff. So as a milestone, not as a milestone, but as a North Star, as a thing to aim for, they are actually great. But I don't think that blaming someone or arguing that, okay, you are not complying to all of them is actually a good thing, because for me, this set is not the thing that it's not like a checklist that you need to fill it all. For me, is the more you have, the better. And if you have them all, that's absolutely great. But if you don't have like one or two, that's still okay. Meaning that you have time and space to improve and to get these check marks later on.
Yeah. So some of the criticism that has come towards Lido is basically because of these check marks that are missing, right? Do you think that people get the criticism wrong? Like, like, for example, the decentralization. So the idea is that Lido has, 30% of the Ethereum stake is with Lido, and Lido was running on, 30 node operators. So each node operator had, 1% of Ethereum stake. Like, that is not decentralized. Like, do you think that that was a fair criticism, or what were the problems with that criticism of Lido?
I guess it's a matter of what you compare with. If one may say that having like 30 node operators, or actually a bit more, like each controlling 1% of the network, is not a decentralization at all, because there are networks where each entity controls no more than 0.1%. For example, like take Gnosis, that might be the case. Their level of decentralization is actually fantastic. I learned about it recently and I was very surprised. On the other hand, you can say that, well, why it is bad? Because on Polygon, you can only have 100 validators maximum, with no guarantee that their shares would be equal, meaning that the top validators would have way more than 1%. And it is still considered to be decentralized. So it's a matter of the view angle, I would say. Again, if one would say that, hey, this is the final stage of Lido, nothing is going to change further, that's the end game, I would say that, no, for the end game, that's definitely not enough. That can be improved. But given that we are not talking about the end game, but we are talking about some intermediary state, which is already not the case with simple DVT, and would definitely be not the case with CSM and with increased share of CSM and with further improvements, I would say that as an intermediary milestone, for me, it is better than average, I would say. And it's a good, solid position to improve further. But if someone would say, no, that's the end, that's the final version, I would say that, no, for me, it's not enough. It definitely.
Yeah, so I guess you just answered my next question as well, is like, what do these people get right about their criticism? So I like that idea of this is developing towards further decentralization, which, like you said, it's a simple DVT module, and then the CSM is working towards that. And we'll talk about both of those in a little while. One of the things that I want to talk to you about is the Lido governance, right? Like, that is something that people say is quite centralized because it's LDO token weighting. And what the fear is that the Lido governance could potentially be an attack vector on Lido. How much do you know about the way that Lido governance works, and like, what are your thoughts about that? And you can refer to the self cap vote that took place, right, where 99% of Lido governance people said we should not cap below like 33%, because that's not necessary, whereas the criticism was after 33%, Lido can start to impact Ethereum consensus by preventing finality if there's a bug in the Lido software. So I know that's quite a lot there, but generally, like, what are your thoughts on Lido governance, and like, how do you think that all works?
Okay, let's try to break this question into parts, because you
that was a lot.
Yes, that was a lot.
So let's just start with the governance, and then we can like explore the other areas.
Okay, so speaking of governance, the main thing that I can tell about any token-based governance. No, let's start first. There's no perfect governance. Just yesterday, I watched an amazing video by Vertasium, I guess, about the fact that from the mathematical point of view, all of our currently used voting systems in real life, not in crypto, they are not perfect. And there's even a mathematical theorem that proves that the existing systems are not perfect, and at least one of the conditions is not met for them. So definitely token-based governance is not a great thing. So the best thing that I see in terms of a governance is lack of a governance at all. But it is not technically possible in terms of a technical stack of an Ethereum that we are working on. And what else can I say here is that the main problem, I would say, is not the theoretical governance capture, because even though it is possible, starting from some scale, it becomes economically unfeasible. So when we think about, for example, risks in CS, and when we are trying to calculate the bond, by the way, the updated research will go live probably next week. So we will have a topic to discuss, but maybe in Discord. We think about the fact that, okay, this attack is theoretically possible, but is it economically feasible? And when we are talking about large scales, I think the larger the scale, like the larger the value of the token, the less feasible and the less reasonable it is to perform an attack. So the actual problem of a token-based governance, from my perspective, and as I see it now, is a lack of participation. So it's really hard to get people involved. And you guys already seen it with the updates of PDAO. As I noticed, it was not that easy to get people to either to opt in, or I'm not quite sure about the details, but I know that you are now feeling more or less the same as Lido contributors who are responsible for facilitating voting. So the main problem is actually to get participation and not to protect against attacks. But speaking of protecting against attacks, again, as the question with the permissionless entry, this question was also never left aside. There were just time required to propose a solution for it, to propose a feasible solution. And for me, dual governance is, again, dual governance would not make Lido governance perfect. That's the fact. That's just an additional safeguard to protect against this governance attack. And it's like, why, for example, why people are not robbing banks each day? Because they know that at the end of the day, they will get in jail or stuff like that. Maybe not with 100% guarantee, but with a very high likelihood. And dual governance, for me personally, is the ability for STF holders to say, no, we are not okay with it, we are leaving. And that's probably the worst thing that could happen with LDO holders. So if there would be no protocol, if there would be no people delegating their ETH to the protocol, there would be no value in terms of a protocol governance, meaning that there would be no value in LDO token. And that's a great thing. I personally believe that this mechanism would never be used, I hope. But if it will ever be used at a decent scale, that would probably be the end of all. So for me, this mechanism is a very sensitive thing that should be very well designed and should not contain any possible issues or bugs or stuff like that, because it might result in a worse situation than without this safeguard. But at the same time, it solves one of the main points of criticism and existing problems here. So that's my thinking on the token-based governance. Yeah, it's definitely not perfect, but as some say, it's hard for me to find a quote. But the thing is, I mean, it's not perfect, but it's like the other options are not perfect too.
That's you're thinking of the Churchill quote, like democracy is the worst of there's a bad system, but it's better than all the rest we've tried. That's I think that's what you're thinking of. Let's talk about a couple of things that have come up, like with this Ethereum alignment angle and Lido governance / messaging from Lidos. I hinted at the governance thing, and there was one specific vote about Lido self-limiting to 33%, and or I think it was 33% or 22. I think it was 33%. And basically the vote was turned down. Another thing that happened is I think it was at DevConnect. 2 years ago, or maybe ETH Denver, I think it was DevConnect, where Vasily was on stage and talking about, who should be node operators on Ethereum. And he was basically saying that, there's hobbyists and they're not that good. And this is a game for professionals. So those kind of ideas kind of really upset people who think that, Ethereum should be better than those things like, the gold standard should be home staking. We should protect Ethereum consensus and we should limit, the footprint of any specific group. Like, what do you think of those particular angles of criticism of Lido? Like, do you think they were fair? Do you think they were not fair? Like, what are your thoughts about those?
Okay, so let's start with a self-limit vote. To be honest, it is, again, it's hard to say for sure, like, was it needed or was it not? We can say now, when we see that the market decided towards the situation where we are now, where this vote is absolutely useless. We have a lot of players on the market, and as we see from their shares, it looks like the market is no longer moving too fast. Like the capital is not moving from one protocol to another, so market is more or less stable. And right now, like 2 years after, we can confidently say that this vote wasn't necessary. Can we say the same back in the day? I'm not sure, to be honest. So I still think that adding, like, the more duct tape you add to the existing pile of duct tape, which we call Ethereum, the less reliable it is. But that's only a way of thinking. So it's hard for me to argue. Again, right now I can say that this vote was not necessary, and the decision made never turned out bad for Ethereum. Was that a chance for it to turn out bad? Theoretically, yes, but that's only theoretically. Again, by the time of the vote, I was not that deeply involved into all this discussions and dilemma. And as I've been seeing Lido from the inside, from my very first day in crypto, I can confidently say that the risks that were described in the possible attack vectors, they are actually not realistic. So I do like the paper, I'm not quite sure about, by one of the Ethereum researchers about real risks of Lido. And I do think that he correctly outlined that the main risk is actually soft power, and that's the reality of the world. So this is not only about crypto, that's about world in general. If you will look outside, you will see that in most cases, the soft power is probably the most significant power that we see in the world right now. But the other risks, like, the bug in Lido software, I mean, come on, there's no such a thing as Lido software, at least interacting with the consensus layer. So that's definitely not a fair point of criticism. Some theoretical bugs on a smart contract layer, yeah, maybe, but back in the day, Ethereum consensus layer and execution layer were never connected. I mean, only from execution layer to consensus layer, but not vice versa. So that was also not the case. And in terms of collusion of the node operators, that's probably the main point. You can maybe ask Iridian, because he was the person, not me, but the other person who mentioned it out loud, that before he joined Lido, he was thinking of Lido as a huge behemoth controlled by maybe 2 or 3 people, with any decisions being made by this, like, a bunch of people. But that's actually not the case. If you will ever participate in the chat of Lido node operators, there's always hot discussions about things. And for me, again, as I feel it, there's no way that these operators would ever collude, or if someone, for example, Easy or someone else would tell them, hey, you guys should not update the client version. So stuff like that. They would simply say, oh, no way, it is not for us. And this risk, even though, again, I should admit that theoretically this risk is possible. But in practice, and practice is what's important at the end of the day, in practice, for me, it is not possible. So I think that it turned out well. It theoretically might be an issue, but it never was. And I think it never will ever again, just because of the fact and of the situation that we see at the market.
Yeah, there's more staking companies online, like, with varying levels of decentralization. But the fact that there is a lot more online now just means that Lido is potentially unlikely to get to those levels where it might be dangerous is your point. So that's cool.
Yeah.
Let's talk about how you spend time in the Rocket Pool community. Like, you pop by the Discord fairly often. Like, why do you do that?
One day when we got in touch with Easy, like more closely, Vasily told me that before Lido, Easy was actually very active in Rocket Pool community. Mm-hmm. I don't know the full story actually, but I know the fact that he was active in Rocket Pool community. That's why I decided to give it a try. My first attempt was shocking probably for anyone just joining Rocket Pool Discord. It might be shocking from time to time. But after that, starting from, I guess, almost like a year and a half, when we started working on CSM, and I will be totally transparent here, I mean, we were the last to actually release something, to create something, and definitely decided that we need to do a super thorough research and understand what do competitors do, what are the do's and what are the don'ts, what things we can borrow as a concept or as an idea, or what things we definitely should avoid. And the same goes not only for the technical part, but also for the community part. Because back in the day, I mean, maybe even now, it's hard to argue about it. But what I can say is that Rocket Pool community is one of the strongest communities in crypto, at least from my perspective. And I'm jumping into your server, guys, from time to time. Before I was jumping just to learn about the community, to see what people are talking about. Right now, I'm jumping in to see, is someone posting shit about CSM? Is there a place to join discussion? Like, if not, okay, I'll keep it silent, because again, sometimes raising topics in Rocket Pool Discord might be challenging, but sometimes I might be in a mood when I want a hot discussion and I jump in and post some shit, and then the discussion starts and I'm like, oh, that's made my day.
So, like Izzy, of course, you mentioned as well, he's been a long time participant in the Rocket Pool community, I guess before he started with Lido, but he's been visiting the community less frequently over the last couple of years, I guess. But we do see you around quite often, at least like once a week, every few days or something like that. How does it feel to you when people shit on Lido and say Lido's evil, Lido's bad, Lido's the worst thing in the world? Like, do you take that personally, or do you see it as a chance to potentially reflect on those points and see how you can make Lido better?
I definitely not take it personally, because Lido is Lido, myself is myself. So nothing personal here.
Yeah.
As it comes from my mentality, I always analyze, even when someone is saying that I am bad personally, or I am doing some things bad personally, I always try to analyze. If we're speaking about the third party, as Lido in this case, I definitely try to understand, is there any reasoning behind? So is this person, probably he was trying to say something important, but the way he told it was not great, or everything was great and I just need to read it one more time and understand. So I always try to analyze and to ask additional questions, maybe to reply, and reading through the replies from this person, I can better understand what he or she is trying to say. Yeah, so no, I'm never taking it personally. I would say that the thing that impressed me the most about Rocket Pool community was my post when we've been walking through the Rocket Pool code, when PDAO was not a PDAO but a EOA, and I posted about it on Twitter. I got tons of shit, not only from Rocket Pool community, but also from other Lido contributors saying, hey man, that was already known fact, what you're doing, people are not doing like that. I'm a pretty straightforward person, to be honest, and for me, that was a discovery. That's why I decided to post about it. So what impressed me about Rocket Pool community at that time is the way how the community can come up together to protect their values and to protect their beliefs. That was actually great. And this experience for me, that was probably the only experience that I took personally, because that was my personal tweet and response to my personal tweet. But after that, I was never taking it personally. And I'm always trying to understand, again, the reasoning behind. Not all of the community members in Rocket Pool are actually putting shit on Lido for some reason. Some of them just do like to put shit. I mean, they are free to do so.
It's fun.
Yeah, that's definitely fun. Why not?
I have shit on Lido a few times in the past, and like I'll be honest, like when Lido's CSM came out, I was very angry about it.
I know.
And
I watched this episode of Rocket Fuel.
That was when it was in November. I think November 17th, I want to say it is, of 2023. And I had, like, a couple of days ago, like, started hearing about Lido CSM, and then I really understood it. And I was like, what the fuck is this? Like, they're gonna kill staking across everyone. And I was really passionate about it. But then I think what happened is we as a community kind of like took a second to be like, the initial reaction was like, what is this? And then right away we were like, okay, we need to fix this. Like, we need to adapt, right? Or we're going to die. And I think that has been one of the biggest catalysts for change in Rocket Pool, is this idea of CSM, and CSM is coming. That has made Rocket Pool now go from what it was to this idea, like, on the verge of Rocket Pool 2.0. It's like kind of our official roadmap now, with the Saturn upgrades that are coming hopefully, early next year. It changed Rocket Pool completely. Like, it changed the conversations that the community felt like we were allowed to have, because people had made some of those points in the past, not in the context of Lido, but just in the context of Rocket Pool, saying, hey, we need to change some of these things. And the community was like, what are you talking about? We can't change these things. Like, these are things that we can't change. But then once the idea of CSM came out, we were just like, shit, like, we need to change. And like, those topics that were almost religious foundations before started to be questioned. And I think that there's some credit to Lido for that in a weird way, that kind of made us like think that, if we don't change, we'll die. So let's actually talk about that. CSM is like your main thing. That's the thing that you've been working on. When did this idea of CSM develop? And I know that CSM is one of the modules, a community staking module. It means that, permissionless entry into staking with Lido. This is alongside another module that Lido's developed in the last year, which is the distributed validator module, like the simple DVT module that you have. Like, how did these modules develop? I know that, you're involved in the CSM one. Tell me about how that idea came to you and like how it grew.
That idea actually not came to me. And you mentioned this DEF CON 2 years ago. And I want to say that I want to comment on it a bit. I guess there's a match of two factors. I have my animations. Sorry for that.
That's okay.
So the first thing is that Vasily, he's a technical guy, as well as me. And technical guys are usually not great at explaining things in a politically correct way. So from time to time, I even have these issues within my family when I try to explain something to my wife. From time to time, she might look at me like, what the hell are you talking about? And then I realized that that's not what I meant to say. So the wording was off, or something like that was off. So what Vasily was trying to say, I guess, I cannot be 100% sure, but I guess what he was trying to say is that the reality is that back in the day, the majority of operators were professional operators, and again, back in the day, home stakers were performing worse than professional operators. And what he was trying to say is that this is the reality, so let's accept this reality and then try to move starting from this reality and not from some ideal point of view where the world would be made out of ponies or stuff like that. That's the first thing. And the second thing, that during this conference, my sister, who already joined Lido, who is already working on CSM, she was doing a thorough research. So by that time, I was not involved at all. We've been doing our security stuff in Lido. And she was already doing a research about community stakers, about who they are, like why do they choose to do solo staking, what they are missing, and so on. So back in the day, the research was started. And only after 9 months, I guess, since that DEF CON, or maybe even more, maybe even 10 months, the research and all the internal discussions around what is the best way, how can Lido actually jump into this permissionless stuff without ruining the existing principles. So basically, more or less the same as you've mentioned for Rocket Pool, saying this thing cannot be ever changed, but for Lido it was from the other side. And then when the research was more or less formed and it was time to actually try to understand, is it even feasible to implement it in the code? It was me and my team to join. As the result of the research, there were things like, okay, these are the points that are actually missing from the from the base layer of Ethereum or from the ecosystem that solo stakers or independent or home stakers are looking for, with the main outcome for sure being that the entry barrier is relatively high, both technical and economical, and a bunch of other stuff. And then we come together. We decided that, okay, it is time for our team to switch, especially given that we've almost finished with all of the stuff that we've been doing before. And again, got a bit bored of it. So we were looking for something new, and CSM was actually something new. And we started working on CSM in the middle of summer.
Yeah, interesting. And then with that work that started, I guess you started talking about it more publicly last November, right? Like that's when your initial research and your ideas about CSM started to become public. And that's when the Rocket Pool community kind of reacted to the news of the CSM. How did you take it when you watched that episode of mine when I was talking about how Lido is kind of evil and taking over everything, or whatever, the exact words I said? Well, what were you thinking at that time of what was going on in relation to CSM and what it might mean for Lido and its growth?
I guess the main outcome for me from watching your episode and watching feedback from the others, from talking with Pablo, who was in Diva back in the day. We were talking with him in person in Istanbul. The main outcome was that if you're creating, or if you're doing something that no one wants to talk about, it means you are doing something not important. If people are talking about it, no matter in what way, either they are putting shit on you or they are saying, oh, you did a great job, what an amazing thing. No matter if they are talking about it, it means that this is a thing that is important for community. It might be important in a good or in a bad way. It is hard to understand like at that moment, but it is something that is important for community. So I was very pleased to see a lot of attention from other staking participants speaking about CSM, even though by that time there were no such a thing as CSM. There was only a list of ideas and a very, very drafty code of something that was not even working. And we've changed a lot of concepts later on. But yeah, I was pretty, yeah, I would say that I was satisfied with the work done. So we've been working on it for almost 6 months. I did a preliminary presentations or announcements during Korean Blockchain Week, also in 2023, like 2 or 3 months before. But that was not, that was only for a small audience. There were no such a thing as recording or stuff like that. And we've never published a document back in the day. Yeah. So once we've published the document, yeah, that I guess the November was the official date of the announcement, but we actually started working something like 6 months before that.
Yeah. So one of the things that I'll be honest and that I'm quite upset about is there's this idea in development work, application development and software development of Hofstadter's law, which says that however long you think a project is going to take, it's actually going to take longer than that. And if you account for it taking longer than that, it will still take longer than that. So this is like a famous maxim in development. You guys said you'll have Lido's CSM ready by Q4 of 24, which was like a year away at that time. And we're like, okay, so it might take 6 months longer than that. But you're on track for getting it out on time. How did that happen? Like, what have you guys been doing to make it work like on time? Like, I'm so upset.
Yeah, that's actually a good question. So it turns out that there's a way to at least to not to overcome, but to minimize this effect. And the thing is that you take your calculations, you take like a realistic timeline. That's what we did. And then we added a lot. So we ended up with a year. So our realistic estimation, if everything goes well, were 6 months. So we multiplied it by 2. But internally, what we've been trying to do is each time someone was coming and say, hey, the deadline is in November 2024, I was saying, no, the deadline is way earlier. And if for some reason we would create it earlier, that would be better. If not, then okay, let's think about it. So we internally actually moved the deadline. So I was hoping to make it happen even in the August, but we are already in September. But when we were planning in November, the internal timeline was to release CSM in summer. That's what we've been aiming for, and we kept in mind that okay, we can move this line, but not too much times. And that's why we are here. So we are still in September. It is not November, and CSM is not released yet, even though most of the things are going pretty smooth. There still might be some hiccups, so I cannot promise you right now that it would be November, but that's what we are aiming for. And again, the key here to be in a timeline is to announce a timeline, like a feasible timeline multiplied by 2, but internally still keep it as tight as possible. And in this case, you would eventually move it. That's true. But if you would, in your mental model, you will keep it low as internally planned, then you will end up with something that came up from this estimation.
So where are you right now in terms of release, like tasks that need to be done before you can release CS?
Actually, we are still waiting for the reports from auditors. So there's 2 ongoing audits. We hope to get all of them in September. After that, by the end of September, I hope we will have everything ready and polished in terms of a technical stuff, so in terms of a code and stuff like that. But what would be left is the operational work, is the actual voting and a lot of routine stuff like making this or that post, getting agreement on this, creating necessary resources and stuff like that. So from the technical perspective, we are more or less okay. If there would be no unexpected findings from auditors, then we should be done with all the technical stuff by the end of September. And hopefully during October, I will be able to sort out all the operational stuff with Sasha.
So you said on Twitter a couple of days ago that with 5 ETH, you'll be able to spin up 3 validators. Is that saying that I did my research. Okay, we pay attention to these things. But is that like, can you tell us a little bit about what the bonding curve might look like for Lido CSM? Like, or is that a little bit too early because your report's coming out next week?
Yeah, so you will see the actual numbers and the reasoning behind the numbers, which is more important than the actual numbers for me, next week, which is something like September 10th or so. It's funny that you've noticed this tweet. I was thinking that no one is reading my Twitter and no one is taking a look at my small teases. But the thing is, yes, that the current outcome of the research, and that's probably the only thing that I can share now, is that it would most likely be the case that for 5 ETH, you will be able to spin up 3 validators. The actual form of the bond curve, you would see it in the research. But as a additional spoiler here, I can say that it is not like on a testnet, because the bond curve on a testnet appeared in the following way. So we've been sitting with Max, having a conversation about what is the minimal value for the bond if we take a very approximate calculation. He said, okay, that's initial slashing plus offline time, plus let's add a bit of
MEV theft
on top. Yeah. So stuff like that. And we end up, no. For the minimal value, we're not considering MEV, because MEV theft is considered in the first values. So if we're speaking about last values, we're saying like what's the minimal thing, and we end up with 1.5. And then I asked him, what value should we choose for the start? What would be safe? And we ended up with 2 ETH out of nowhere, because we've been thinking of a testnet. And then we decided okay, what should the curve be like? Let's make it fancy. Let's actually make it a curve. So we created this decrease. But that has nothing, the curve itself has nothing to do with the research, even though the numbers at the beginning and at the end, they do make some sense. The actual curve makes no sense. It was created just because of the fact that we decided to create a curve. So within the research, what you would see is the reasoning behind the form of the curve, how it should be formed, and the reasoning behind the numbers.
Yeah.
So unfortunately cannot tell more.
We'll see soon. The thing is, what you're saying is very much in line with what the Rocket Pool community has been thinking about pretty much nonstop for the last year. Basically, since last November, we've realized that we need to change. And then around ETH Denver, we had a cohesive proposal, and that has developed since then, but that has become the official roadmap by passing community vote a few weeks ago. And that pretty much will have a curve as well, with the first 2 validators will be 4 ETH. And after that, it'll be 1.5 ETH for as many as you want. And I think something similar will be for Lido. Maybe your first validators will be less, but you don't have to say the specific numbers. That's fine. It seems like Lido is kind of gaining in decentralization by bringing online this CSM, the community staking module. And within the Rocket Pool community, it seems like some people, think that Rocket Pool will become slightly more centralized because of allowing ETH only validators and that not being as pure basically as what we've had so far. Do you think that that's a fair idea of saying that there's like Lido and Rocket Pool that's very slowly moving closer to each other, or do you think that there's still significant differences between those? And I'm just talking about the CSM specifically, not the rest of Lido, like not the permissioned validator set. I'm talking about the permissionless validator set.
Yeah. So that is true, and you're mentioning it right. That again, the bond curve would have similarities with the things that Rocket Pool mentioned. Maybe the reasoning behind would be a bit different, but as it is in math, we are solving the same mathematical problem, and even though there might be multiple solutions to this problem, in most cases, and especially in such a limited case as Ethereum staking, I would say that even though there might be multiple optimal solutions, they are very close to each other. Mm-hmm. So we are gradually moving, probably from different sides, probably from different angles, but we are moving towards maybe not the same point, but the same area, the same relatively small area here. So again, it was clear from the beginning that the pure ETH bonded staking would be of a high demand. And it is even mentioned in the rainbow staking proposal for the base layer of Ethereum, which never made it up to the mainnet, but maybe it will one day. But actually, what Rocket Pool and Lido can offer with pure Ethereum bonded validators is one of the forms of implementation of a rainbow staking, because you supply this risky collateral and this technically riskless collateral, which is not guaranteed, but practically it is riskless. So yeah. And in terms of other things, I mean, we have to deal with MEV theft risk. We have to deal with and again, the way how to deal with MEV stealing, because the most dangerous thing is spikes in MEV, so huge MEV. And how to cover it? Yes, to make this mega pools or just common node operators within Lido CSM, and to encourage people to put all of their validators into one, but not into multiple, so not to create symbols. Mm-hmm. And that's again the same problem. And the solution here would also be similar. So yeah, we are solving same problems, and I think we will eventually end up with something similar. But what is great and what I like about DeFi, and what I don't like about ideas of implementing some stuff, some specific stuff like that on the core level of a protocol, because on a core level, there might be only one implementation and only one solution. But if we are speaking about protocols, there might be multiple solutions, even though they might be similar. Each would have their own peculiarities, own strong points and own weak points, meaning that people would be able to choose. So if they, for example, they do like Rocket Pool governance more than Lido governance, then they can go to Rocket. If they like Lido, for example, from some other aspects, they can go to Lido. Or they can do both, so they can diversify. And that's the thing that I like the most about DeFi. It took me like about 2 years to figure out, like to actually formulate this feeling. But now I have it. And again, that's why I like a fair competition. And that's why I consider Rocket Pool being, again, from a standpoint of a Lido contributor, as a good thing. We've learned a lot from you, and I really like to see that your community is also reacting and you are also evolving. I guess the last year for Rocket Pool was one of the most fruitful years that had ever been in Rocket Pool before.
Yeah, I feel like, the community's really taken control of thinking about the whole protocol. Like, of course, with the PDAO stuff that you were mentioning earlier, it's now very much in the hands of the community. And we've come up with some really great ideas of, how we can make Rocket Pool grow. Of course, the reality is that, we can only do what we can, that's in our control. And then adoption and all of those things can be out of our control, but we're giving ourselves the best chance, which is really cool. Let's go back to CSM. So on day one, it's implemented. What kind of limits are there going to be in place for CSM, and how is it going to look in terms of the greater Lido environment?
So on the launch, the share limit of the module would be 1%. which is reasonable from a point of view that we are launching the thing that has never been automated before. It's pretty easy to start an on-chain vote to raise this limit. But the question is, would there be that much of a demand? I mean, there might be over demand, there might be under demand. And if there would be under demand, there's no point of raising the limit further unless the module is filled. That's the first thing. And the second thing, that it would not be launched in a fully permissionless mode, because as we discussed before, this problem of being permissionless and decentralized at the same time seems to be either unsolvable or very hard to solve for me. So we've decided to take the approach when, for the first period, only members of the early adoption list, which is super wide, like we've taken all the possible resources that we can consider reasonable, more or less. So Gnosis solo stakers, Ethereum solo stakers from different
Rocket pool
sources.
stakers.
I mean, it was the decision of a rocket pool. I was very transparent here. And actually, I posted this thing on a forum and this question on a forum, not for the marketing purpose or stuff like that, but actually because we discussed internally with the team. So one guy was asking like, hey, I'm rocket pool node operator. Why I'm not in the list? And I asked guys like, why we haven't included them? They said, okay, if we would include them, rocket pool would put tons of shit on us.
Yeah, they would say it's a vampire attack.
Yes.
Yeah.
But my take was, but maybe they not. And then we decided, okay, let's go and ask them. And that's what I did. So that was nothing of a marketing. And again, the other sources are also all technical credentials and stuff like that. So that would be a pretty wide list of addresses more or less associated with independent staking participants. And they would be able to spin up only up to 10 validators, which is reasonable given the results of a survey stating that 85% of the people are not planning to spend more than 10 to 20 ETH, or like even less. Literally half of them are planning to spend less than 5 ETH, meaning that 10 validators limit is reasonable. And then after that, when we would see that the increase of like the net inflow or rate of a net inflow of node operators would decrease, then it would be time to start a vote to make it fully permissionless. So the only difference between the early adoption participants and fully permissionless participants would be that early adoption participants can join early to, we hope, ensure that we are not simply launching a thing with a great capital efficiency and we would see like a bunch of professional operators simply taking their bags and putting their bags into CSM as a bond, but instead we would see independent players. And then after that, once the module is permissionless, everyone would be able to join. And there would be a difference in a bond requirement. So because for this early adoption participants, the assumptions, again, about them, first of all, creating a Sybil or performing a Sybil attack, so creating multiple operators, they are limited because they do need to have vetted address to create node operator from, meaning that it's not easy for them to create like 100 operators. They do need to have this 100 addresses, which is not easy. So that's why for them, the bond requirement would be a bit lower, not at the end, but at the beginning. So this first value for the first validator. And so speaking of share limit, it depends on what would be the demand, to be honest. So I do not have clear estimations of what it might be. I hope that the capacity of this 1% would be filled rather rapidly, and maybe even over 2%, and only after that the module will be turned into permissionless mode. But the reality will show, I don't know. So the raise of a share limit would be done gradually. I could not say that it would be done. It would be proposed for the DAO again. That's the thing that we should always keep in mind, that the only thing I can personally do is propose, and the DAO can accept or not. So we as a team, we would propose this share limit increase if there would be enough demand, for sure. And mentioned in the initial proposal, for the first version of CSM, which would be released now, the upper limit is 10%. And the reasoning behind it is not because Lido wants to, or Lido contributors or DAO token holders, they want to limit this only to 10%. No, the reason is pretty simple, because from a technical perspective, there's no way to release something relatively fast and at the same time like super cool. The main limitation here is actually lack of 7002. With EIP 7002, we would be able to implement this missing feature, so that would be called CSM v2, which would probably be released within a year after the first version. And with this version, there would also be a reconsideration of a maximum share limit. But for the first version, without triggerable exits, without the ability to somehow react on more or less extensive attack, DAO had ratified, and I do agree with that 10% is maximum feasible share. But once there would be additional mechanisms, I think it would be reconsidered. But again, the main limiting factor here, in the same way as it is with this Lido share, overall Lido share discussion, is the market. So we may have a lot of discussions, and we had such a discussion with Nixo. She was asking me like, hey, why the hell on earth you are launching with 1%? You are only planning to allocate 1%? No, that's not true. The thing is that we need to see what the market shows, and that we might end up in a situation where like 1.5% would be the maximum value that people would like to occupy within Lido. Because again, even though the capital efficiency might seem super appealing, if we're speaking about community stakers and about independent stakers, even if the entry barrier is super low, it is still extremely hard to convince people to run validators.
Yeah.
It actually takes most of my time for the last half a year to convince as many people as I can to try, just to give it a try for free on the testnet. We were even doing giveaways of the machines, not that much, but still, our community lifeguards, they negotiated this free cloud credits with Google and then with Amazon. And even with all that, so it's absolutely free, it is still hard to convince people just to give it a try. And I'm not speaking about running actual validators on a mainnet.
I think that's one of the cool things that Rocket Pool has, is we already have that built-in community of validators. Like right now, we have somewhere around 1,700 to 2,000 distinct node operators potentially running, which is really amazing. I think like it's pretty cool. And the next step for Rocket Pool is to try to make those existing node operators even more efficient, so we can give them more stake, right? And I guess for Lido, it'll be a similar idea where if you reach that 1% threshold, go to 2%, and if everything's going well, then you can carry on growing with that. I guess for the next year, then you're going to be working on a CSM version 2. Is that something you're excited about? Like, how do you feel about doing that? Like, your next year will be carrying on with CSM stuff.
It is not that exciting as releasing the first version. I would say that it's like doing a homework that you've been delaying for a while. So the main problem with CSM was the key thing to release it in a timely manner was also to cut the scope to a way that it is still feasible, it is still secure, but at the same time, it is not affecting timelines. And I think we are about to reach this goal, but that's why we need to start working on CSM. And actually, we have a draft of a proposal for CSM v2 already. But again, this is just a bunch of my ideas. So we will start working on it soon. I wouldn't say that I'm super excited about it. I would say that this second step should be done very carefully, because when we are building something from scratch, we can launch it. If we'll see that something goes bad, for example, there's still a way to switch it off, to sunset it, while the user base is still relatively small. But when you are updating something, so guys, I have no idea how you guys are updating things in Rocket. That is so scary. So that would be the main focus for me and the team, to make this upgrade fit, to make it secure, not to break anything. And after that, we'll see how it goes. So for me, I don't see major further steps, to be honest, for CSM in the form it is. So there might be some other cool things, maybe some new concepts of how the staking protocol might be built. But for CSM, I see now two main iterations, the first version and the second version, like improved, I would say, with the main idea of supporting triggerable exits for sure.
Great. And what is your hope then, Dimi, from a personal perspective for CSM? Like, what do you hope to see happens in the next, 1 month after launch, 6 months after launch, 1 year after launch? Like, what are your personal milestones?
My personal, like the initial milestone, the official milestone, it has been publicly set on the research forum. So the goal is to have at least 300 net new node operators, or just node operators. It is hard to measure, to be honest. Either they are independent or not within 6 months. But this is a very moderate goal, I would say. So what my personal best would be that if CSM is launched and it reaches the target
1%.
share of 1% before becoming permissionless. It is really challenging actually to do, because with this limit of 10 validators, it would require something like 300 plus validators within a not validators, but not operators, within a first like couple months. And if in January 2025 we would see that CSM is on its target share, or at least have enough keys uploaded and the bonds supplied, maybe not all of them would get deposits by that time. It depends on the market. But if we would see enough keys there, and there would be a reason to initiate the vote to raise the share limit even before making CSM permissionless, that would be the greatest win for me, because before becoming permissionless, we can be more or less sure that the node operators who joined, they are indeed independent operators, and that's the ultimate goal. Yeah. So it's relatively easy to build something that would attract professional operators. I mean, professional operators are bringing their money into Puffer with the system that is, I would say, complicated. But since they do not ask for anything except for ETH, and the requirement is 2 ETH plus this validator tickets, they are willing to bring their investors' funds to Puffer. And that's the clear explanation. Even though the validator ticket system has been criticized, even though there are chances of you ending up with net negative rewards, which is not super cool, institutionals or professional operators, they are still willing to do it. They are still willing to bring money there. So the main goal for me, again, is to bring home stakers and independent stakers, and to encourage as many people as possible.
Interesting. I'm going to wrap up with 2 final questions. The first one is, do you have any message for the Rocket Pool community that you want to share with them, since some of them will be watching this right now? Like, what would you like to share with them?
Okay, I would like to share 2 things. First of all, I want to say thanks for all of the things, for you being such a great and well-established community. That was a great inspiration for me. Thanks for all the comments and criticism towards Lido, even though not all of this comments and criticism were actually
fair.
Yeah, maybe so.
From your perspective, okay.
Constructive, I would say. Some of them were clearly not constructive, like some of them were too. But nevertheless, thanks for that. And the second thing that I want to say is that with the launch of CSM, we were never aiming to make people leave Rocket Pool and join CSM. And I still believe that that's probably the worst thing that people can do. And the best thing that people can do is running their validators in Rocket Pool, run Lido validators or CSM validators alongside. Because of a marginal difference, at least in the current form. So in the current form, we need RPL and 8 ETH, which brings you to a great capital efficiency, and that's cool, and you have all these established things. And if you have some ETH spare, why not to put it into Lido CSM? And again, risk profiles are different, and that's what I've mentioned, that people would be able to choose. And I would want to say to Rocket Pool node operators, guys, it's great that you're in Rocket Pool. Stay in Rocket Pool, but also join Lido, and that will be win-win.
Okay. And finally, is there anything that we didn't cover in our conversation that you might want to share with the audience, like any points, explanations, anything at all?
I even had a list of things that I never looked at. Let me look at it right now. I guess the discussion overall was pretty great. I'm a bit surprised by the fact that we ended up with such a friendly discussion. It's actually the first time we speak in real life. Before that, we only got in touch in chats. I'm very pleased to see you as a person, to speak with you as a person. That's actually super cool. And for me, there are two different persons, Vak on the rocket fuel and Vak on this particular podcast. So yeah. I'm very pleased about that, and thank you so much for having me here.
You're welcome. It's been a really nice chat, and I'll be honest, like I really enjoyed talking to you about this. And like I said, we have criticisms, and some of them are fair, and sometimes people get a bit passionate and maybe say things that are not constructive or not fair. But for the most part, I think what Rocket Pool has done is tried to show Lido ways that it could be better. And with the CSM, what Lido has done inadvertently maybe has shown Rocket Pool a way that it could be better as well. And I think that's kind of cool that we've kind of helped each other in those ways. But the reality is that, we want Ethereum to be successful, and whatever makes Ethereum more successful, that's what we want to support. So thanks for sharing your ideas, your perspectives, your journey. I think that people will actually enjoy listening to this, and I've enjoyed speaking to you, Dimi. So thank you for your time.
Likewise. Thank you so much.